You were here in 2004 when the Marriage Act did define that marriage was to be between a man and a woman. But taking you back to 1961, when Garfield Barwick brings in this legislation, there's no attempt to define it and there's no conscience vote. So what do you make of the initial progress of this debate, all the way back in 1961?
Well, in accordance with thousands and thousands of years of tradition, it was never thought necessary to define that marriage would be between a man and woman, because that's what it was. It was the coming together of two different genders to create, if you like, a new entity altogether. It wasn't seen as necessary to define it.
Well, in 2004, why was it seen as necessary to define it?
Well, there was some early agitation then that we should play around with some social engineering, I suppose. You'd seen it in Norway, I think the first country, just 3 years before that. Holland, a few people starting to move in that direction. And it came up in the party room. I don't remember the precise details of it, but it came up and there was an eloquent argument to the effect that we actually ought to just clarify that marriages between a man and a woman, as we believed then. And of course it enjoyed overwhelming support in both houses quite recently, including from people who of course have shifted their position a very great deal since.
So things have actually changed quite rapidly between 2004 and now in terms of community perceptions about this. Do you not think that Parliament should perhaps keep pace with those community perceptions? Well,
that's a very good and legitimate question. I've thought about this a lot. I'm out of the game now. I've seen it from both sides. I see it now as a voter and a member of the community, but I was once a legislator. What is the role of the Parliament? And there are those who argue, and I understand why they might have argued that up until now, because I think the circumstances have changed, that this is a matter for the parliamentarians to deal with. It has changed, though, very, very rapidly indeed. And I think where we've now got to, quite frankly, you have, because a plebiscite has been promised, firstly, the issue of truth and keeping good faith. It's only been put up once and knocked back by the Senate, on grounds that I think now are massively undermined, I might add. That's one reason why I believe a plebiscite is the only way to handle it. The second issue, though, is a much broader one. Whilst many people in the middle say they're not interested, we should go on with other more important issues, the reality is you've got a substantial group of Australians at both ends of the spectrum, strongly in support, strongly against the redefinition of marriage. They do agree on one thing, which I would say the middle needs to recognise, and that is that these changes are actually very profound. It's a bit glib to say, as some do, all that will happen is that 23,000 Australians, that's the rough estimate made, will have a newfound freedom, that it won't affect anyone else. In fact, people at both ends of the spectrum, if you listen carefully to what they're saying, are saying the profound changes are much further reaching than you might realise. I think in the circumstances where we've got at the moment, this is the thing I feel very passionate about, you've now got a fractured parliament. It's close to broken. Our political system is close to broken. That brings me incredible pain to say, but I'm not the only one saying it. It's reflecting a fractured Australia. I don't see how you can get any cultural assent to changes now unless every Australian has had the opportunity to have a say.
And so what, you're also making the argument that in keeping faith with the people, that the coalition really has no choice but to stick with the option of a plebiscite, which it took to an election?
I think I'm saying now that I think that is the only right way to deal with the Australian people and to deal with this issue.
But in the end, all roads lead back to a vote in Parliament, and should that be a free vote when that happens?
No, I think that, can I say I think that's a nonsense argument in a way. I'm an Australian who believes in traditional marriage. I've been a politician. Can I say to you that if the Australian people, if my fellow Australians, your fellow Australians, the current politicians' fellow Australians, clearly had their say and said, yes, this change should be made, the Parliament would be obliged to act and respect that. And let me make another point. Under those circumstances, those who, and there's a big chunk of them, it's just not good enough to cheaply say they're homophobic or they're old-fashioned. Or the other one, they're ethnic, because many of them are, or they come from the regions and they're old-fashioned and therefore they shouldn't be heard of. They're out of step, for holding traditional views. The only chance I think they then have of giving cultural assent to something that they're plainly not comfortable with is, in the current circumstances, for their fellow Australians to have decided that.
Now we're in a circumstance where the Senate has knocked back that option of getting a plebiscite of all.
Once.
Say it happens now that the government wants to go with a postal vote, on which you might get a very low rate of return. Will that have any actual binding effect on the Australian Parliament?
Well, I think that's a good question. I can't automatically answer it, but it runs the risk of giving you an Irish outcome. So everyone runs around saying, oh, look what the Irish did, and they forget that in fact only 37% of the eligible Irish voters voted yes. So I don't know that you've got the sort of cultural legitimacy for the change out of those sorts of numbers. Can I emphasise again here, where I'm really coming from on this is that I am really concerned as an Australian who was part of a government where we managed to get the social cohesion we needed to translate into the political cohesion we needed to take the nation forward, that the fracturing we're seeing here, which is now evident across so much of the Western world, is threatening our very future. Now, same-sex marriage is only one of the issues that's fracturing us, but it's a surprisingly important, little sort of time bomb in there, in my view. And it's a classic example of where we've got to try and ensure that we don't have this problem where ordinary Australians think elites overruled us. I was silenced. I wasn't able to have my say. We've seen how damaging that is around the world. We don't want to import any more of it here.
So just going to the broader problem that you see, isn't the fracturing of Australian politics no better illustrated than the fracturing of the coalition and the Liberal Party in particular, where it now would appear that anyone inside a party can run an issue that they believe is important with no concern at all about what it might do to either the Prime Minister or the government? Does that concern you?
Very deeply. Because I actually think the fracturing that's happening, not just in the Liberal Party, but politically, reflects what's happening in our country. And that's why my plea here is to say, not just to the politicians, but to anyone who will listen, this is a decision now we have to make together or it'll fracture us even more. And that's, in my view, an absolutely critical issue. We've got to get a process here that minimises the fracturing, maximising the ownership of whatever decision is made. Because remember, whilst, and I would say to my former colleagues and those who have replaced me in this place, you've only bolted up to the Senate once, and the reasons given really now no longer hold much credibility. So we were told that it would unleash an ugly debate. Well, you've had a lot of ugliness, all right, but overwhelmingly it's been from the advocates of change. That's a reality that's not been played out. But there's another aspect. Mr Shorten plainly now doesn't have a problem with plebiscites. That's obvious. So that reason's gone. And I actually would urge all politicians, not just in the coalition, look, we've got to find a way to minimise the
But just to be clear on this, if there was, it doesn't appear that there will be through the Senate, an opportunity to ask all of Australia what they thought of this, and it came back with a resounding, yes, this is a change we want you to make. Given you have you don't want same-sex marriage, you would say that the coalition should be bound by that they should accept that that's what the community wants.
I think I would simply say, I mean, look, there are always people who are going to have conscientious objections, but I'd simply say, I don't see how the Parliament could ignore the will of the people. And I also say as someone who doesn't want change, and I know I'm not alone in this because you can read it in the commentary everywhere, if my fellow Australians, if I knew they really wanted this change, having heard the debate, by the way, because one of the reasons that this has gone so badly wrong is, whilst it's been talked about a lot, there's been a lot of hot air and a lot of silencing of debate, and you never get good public policy. It's one thing I learnt in public life. You do not get good public policy out of a bad debate, or a truncated debate, or a silenced debate, or a debate where many people feel intimidated about putting their views.
Just to finish, and on a much broader issue, it would appear to me, from just hearing you speak, that you are almost in a state of despair about Australian politics at the moment.
I'm worried about it in the country. It's not just politics, because I think it's a mirror image of the fact that we're fragmenting. We lack a common consensus. We concentrate so much in the name of identity politics and what have you on what divides us, not what unites us, at a time when we face massive strategic and economic dangers globally, as much as here in terms of what we do at home Australia. I think we're asleep at the wheel in terms of what's happening globally, and we need to be unified, focused, clearly led, and willing to respect leadership. There's two sides of that coin, to face up to the issues that, frankly, are making this look like a very dangerous time for our kids and our grandkids.
John Anderson, thank you.
Thank you.